Assalamu alaikum everyone. So last time we covered okay. So last time we covered modernity and we discussed René Descartes, so the French philosopher. So can you remind me what he did again? What was his contribution?
René Descartes.
Yeah.
He did. We said he did. He's the father of rationalism.
Yeah, and modern philosophy.
Modern philosophy.
Yeah. So what method did he?
Oh, doubt.
Yeah, doubting, skepticism.
Yeah.
Right. So now after they doubted, previously held beliefs that they had, the Europeans doubted, and they built new beliefs based upon a set of principles, and those sets of principles we roughly call them modernity, okay, or modernism. So now it was only a matter of time before that doubt So it was only a matter of time before that doubt is going to engulf the values that modernity put forward, right? So that is exactly what happened. So now there were some philosophers. So we discussed some of the features of modernity in the previous session as well. So modernism believed, the scientists and the ones who subscribe to modernism believe that there is an objective reality out there, and our duty is to go out there and to investigate the objective reality, okay? And to put that reality in mathematical forms, and that is what we call science, right? And then they imported the scientific methodology and they applied it to different sciences, such as different fields in humanity, which is the social sciences, right? So they said that, okay, we are going to deploy the scientific method in studying the society, and they called it social sciences, okay? And then they did the same with economics, and they called it modern economics or capitalism. So now this was the common theme during modernity. Now there were some philosophers, modern philosophers, the Enlightenment era philosophers, who started to doubt some of the assumptions that came up during modernity. The first one was this person by the name of David Hume. We discussed him last time as well, David Hume. And David Hume was the first person, not the first person, but he was the one who, in the most prominent sense, gave this problem with the reasoning, with the scientific reasoning. And that problem is called the problem of induction. Anyone is familiar with the problem of induction?
Mathematical induction?
No, not that one. So last time we discussed what science is. We briefly discussed what science is. So we said that there are three kinds of reasoning. So one is deductive, the other is inductive, and the third is abductive. And science is the second one, inductive. And inductive means that we have limited observations, and we assume that the universe is uniform, and then we generalize the theory to everywhere else in the universe, right, or the earth or whatever. Right? So it depends on what kind of theory we are presenting. So that is induction. And then David Hume was an empiricist. So empiricist meaning that he did not believe that we are born with any knowledge. He said that when we experience things, then we inculcate knowledge, right? Then we acquire knowledge. We are not born with any knowledge. That is what David Hume believed in. So then he asked himself. So let me just explain with an example because it's a bit tricky to explain. So let's say you are from an Amazon rainforest or whatever, right? You never saw fire in your life. You have been in the jungle, and you are a, I don't know what you call it, fruitarian. You have always been eating fruits. You have been surviving on fruits. Okay? And now I came to you, and for the first time I lit a match, and you saw a fire. Okay, that was the first time ever you saw a fire. And now I did it the second time. Again, I did that action again, and the fire lit up. Now I did the third time, the fire lit up. So now, before doing the fourth time, I'll ask you what is going to happen. So you say, yeah, the fire is going to light up. So now, in your mind, you are going to say that whenever you are going to make this connection between this action of lighting the fire up and the fire itself. So you are going to say, so whenever I'm going to strike the match, then the fire is going to come up. So David Hume then questioned, because this is what happens in science. So you have repeated patterns, and then you say that these patterns are going to repeat in the future as well. And those patterns, the repetition of those patterns are explained by causality, cause and effect. So the cause was that I did this motion, okay, and then there was the friction or whatever, and that caused the fire. Okay. So the motion and the friction was the cause, and the effect was the fire. Okay. So that was the explanation of why things repeat over and over again. So David Hume questioned it. David Hume said that is it because we can explain it logically through cause and effect, or is it because I have faith that the future is going to behave like the past? Okay. So David Hume came to a conclusion that it is the latter. So I have a faith that the future, so scientists, what they do is that they observe the patterns and regularities in the universe, and then they have a faith. They cannot reason it. They just have a faith that the future is going to behave like the past. Okay?
Well, we call it assumption, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is what I said, right? So scientists explain it as causality. Okay, so this is cause and effect, this is what happens. So whenever you have the same cause, you will have the same effect. So David Hume questioned it. David Hume said that is it causality, or is it because we see repeated patterns and then we have a faith that it's going to occur in the future? Is it that, or is it causality? Is there something as causality? So David Hume questioned it. And David Hume came to a latter conclusion that because we are not born with any knowledge, any a priori, any born knowledge, so therefore it has to be the faith, right? Therefore it has to be the latter, that it is a faith that the future is going to behave like the past. Okay. So that gave rise to a problem which is called the problem of induction. So which says that David Hume said this, right? So the course of nature may change, and an object seemingly like those which we have experienced may be attended with different or contrary effects. So what that means in simple language is that there can be future observations which can contradict our past observations. So therefore we can never be sure about the future. We can say, we can generalize it, and usually it works, in science it works, but we can have future observations which will contradict our past observations. And this is a very common objection to science, which is used by philosophers and also by many Muslims as well. When someone claims that science gives you absolute truths, so many Muslims also say that there can always be a future observation which is going to contradict the previous observation, and hence scientific theories can change. So if you see the theory of gravitation during Newton, the theory of gravitation that Newton gave was different from what Einstein gave. So there were many problems with that, and some problems with that, such as the orbit of Mercury. And Einstein, his theory of gravity, his theory of relativity, then replaced the theory of gravity that Newton proposed. Okay? So this is a classical problem, that you can always have a future observation which can contradict the past observations, and hence your scientific theories can change. Okay? So from there on, from this particular problem that David Hume gave, then philosophers started to question some of the assumptions. They started to apply skepticism to the assumptions that Enlightenment came up with. And another very important one, probably the most brilliant philosopher in all of Enlightenment, Immanuel Kant. So what modern historians and philosophers, what they say about Immanuel Kant is that because Enlightenment was attacking the religion a lot, okay, Enlightenment was an attack on religion in some sense. So Immanuel Kant wanted to preserve the tradition. He was not very religious, but he wanted to preserve the tradition. He felt that some things about religion are very good, and therefore we should not be abandoning it altogether. So in order to preserve the tradition, preserve the religion, he wanted to attack some of the aspects of Enlightenment reasoning. Okay? And therefore he gave he wrote his book, which was by the name of Critique of Pure Reason. Okay? In that he criticized, or he discussed and criticized some of the prevailing philosophies that were there. And the important thing about is that Immanuel Kant, what Immanuel Kant said was very profound. I'll try to explain it. So Enlightenment philosophers, they believe that there's an objective reality out there, and our brain is just like a detector. Okay? So it detects what the objective reality is. So Immanuel Kant said the other way around. It's not this way, it's the other way around. It's not that there's an objective reality out there and our brain is a detector, right? So the outside world, our brain is not dependent upon the outside world, but the outside world is dependent upon the brain. That is what Immanuel Kant said, right? So that is transcendental idealism. So he said that, yeah, outside world exists, I'm not denying it, But it's not that we are just detectors of this objective outside world. It's the outside world that conforms to our brain. It's the outside world that conforms to our brain rather than our brain conforming to the outside world. Okay, so we can't the other way around. So that is what is called transcendental idealism. Is it extremely confusing, or is it okay? Because it's good. Sounds like so it's just some of the assumptions that the philosophers and the scientists came up with during the Enlightenment. They were being challenged in Enlightenment itself. Okay? Immanuel Kant was the one. He was the one who, and David Hume, they were the ones who started challenging him. And then Immanuel Kant gave 4 examples in which there were 4 contradictory examples. Okay? So he wanted to limit reason in some sense, so that the Enlightenment reasoning does not attack religion. Okay? A little bit, there are some parallels to Ibn Taymiyyah, but then Ibn Taymiyyah gave a better solution, in my opinion, much better solution. So he wanted to give some logical contradictions which cannot be solved. Okay? So he gave 4 logical contradictions, and he said, which we are not going to discuss, of course, and he said that these logical contradictions cannot be solved through reason. Okay? And that is why reason is limited. And he said that since we cannot observe, so he said reason is limited to things that we can observe. And since we cannot observe God, we cannot observe metaphysical things, therefore supernatural things. Therefore, we should not speculate about it, we should not reason about it. Right? So he closed off reason to God, to religion, okay? And therefore, in some sense, he tried to preserve the tradition, and he did succeed in some sense in preserving the concept of God and the concept of religion. Okay? So he said that, okay, there are many contradictions in logic and reasoning, so you should not go towards religion, should not attack it that much, okay? Because many historians said because he wanted to preserve some of the aspects of tradition because he thought that they were useful for the society. And I have another theory which I would present, is that I think Immanuel Kant read Muslim philosophers. I really do believe that he read Muslim philosophers such as Ghazali and Ibn Arabi, because if you read them and if you read Immanuel Kant, then their works have a lot of parallel. So maybe it can be, it is possible that he was acquainted with Muslim philosophers as well. So now, after Immanuel Kant, then the school of German idealism. Okay, so German philosophers who believed in the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, that emerged, and that became associated with being, we can say, a bit irrational. Irrational in the sense that it did not believe in the Enlightenment reason. Okay? Enlightenment philosophers and scientists, they believe that we can achieve objective reality through reason. Whereas the German version of Enlightenment, the German philosophers, they believe that no, reason, there are many contradictions, and therefore reason cannot be absolute. Okay? And therefore reason cannot be the ultimate judge over things. So now, after Immanuel Kant, there was another philosopher by the name of Hegel. He was from the school of Immanuel Kant, and then Immanuel Kant said that there are many contradictions, we cannot solve it. Okay, he gave 4 examples, and he said therefore reason is limited. Hegel said he went a step further. He said that Immanuel Kant assumed that contradictions are wrong. So how did he come to that assumption that contradictions are wrong? Right? So he said that everything is inherently contradictory, and there's nothing wrong with contradiction. So he accepted contradiction, which is a bit irrational. Of course, it is in the Quran as well. It is said that if there is anything, if you are going to challenge this book, then bring any contradiction in it. Okay? So Muslims also believe that that contradictions could not exist. Okay, there cannot be a married bachelor, or there cannot be a squared circle. Right? So these are contradictions. The Muslims believe that they cannot exist. But Hegel, because he was influenced by the examples that Immanuel Kant gave, and he said that Immanuel Kant made a mistake when Immanuel Kant said that it's reason that is limited because we cannot solve these contradictions. Right? So that is what Immanuel Kant said. But Hegel said that contradictions, there is no problem with it. Okay? So he went to an extreme end. And he gave his famous dialectic. So dialectic means that he said that the society progresses in a dialectic way. So what it means is that there are sets of ideas and beliefs, right, that are prevalent in a society, and then which he called thesis. And then there's an antithesis which arises up, which opposes the thesis. And then there's a compromise reached between the two, which is called synthesis. Okay? And then that synthesis becomes a thesis, and then maybe sometimes afterwards another antithesis arises, then another synthesis occurs. So this is how ideas change in a society, and this is how society progresses. So this is what Hegel said, which later we are going to discuss. It's going to be important. And then afterwards came this person with a big mustache. His name is Friedrich Nietzsche. Anyone has heard about Friedrich Nietzsche?
He wrote God is Dead.
Yeah. So Friedrich Nietzsche said basically this. I'm going to read it out. It is our needs that interpret the world, our drives. Every drive is a kind of place to rule. Each one has its perspective that it would like to compel all the other drives to accept as a norm. So what Friedrich Nietzsche said was that he said to the European philosophers and the scientists, he said, okay, you got rid of religion, you got rid of the set of values that you ascribed to previously, right? And you adopted this skepticism. Right? You adopted the values of skepticism, of doubting, of questioning things. But he said that you came up with new sets of values, and you did not abandon the values that you tried to abandon. You did not abandon them fully. Okay, such as the idea of truth. The Enlightenment philosophers believe that there is a truth out there which we can see. Okay, there is a truth out there, and we can represent that truth in terms of science, mathematical models. Okay, in terms of language, so we can write things about it. So we can represent truth by science, by mathematics, and there's a truth out there. So Nietzsche said that this truth you have inherited from religion, right? So without religion, you don't have a truth. So you have to get rid of the truth. That is what Nietzsche said. Okay. So be a man and get rid of the truth. That is exactly what Nietzsche said. So he said this, and then afterwards he said that the true beliefs that we held, the true beliefs that we hold, they are just perspectives. They are subjective, and therefore he gave this. He gave this philosophy of perspectivism. He said that everyone has its own perspective, everyone has its own way of interpreting things. Okay, there's no such thing as truth. So we denied objective truths. And perspectivism is different to relativism. Relativism also means that everyone has its own truths. But perspectivism, what Nietzsche meant by perspectivism was that there are some people whose perspective is better than the other people's perspective. So he said that my perspective is better than everyone else's. So now, after all of these philosophers came up with some ideas that contradicted reason, and they also challenged reason, which the reason in the way that the Enlightenment philosophers believed in. Okay? So then this person by the name of Martin Heidegger, he was not the final, but he was the most influential, you can say, philosopher of the 20th century, and he gave his set of beliefs, what he believed in. Okay? So he said that contradiction are the deepest truths of reality. So it's going through all the way from Immanuel Kant, Hegel. Okay, Heidegger said that contradiction is the truth of reality. We cannot solve it. And then he said reason is subjective and important to reach truths about reality, which means that we cannot reach truth through reason. Enlightenment philosophers believe the opposite, that we can reach truth through reason. Okay, whereas Heidegger said that no, we cannot reach truth through reason. And reasons, words, elements, and concepts are obstacles that must be uncrusted, subjected to destruction, or otherwise unmasked. Okay, so he basically said that language is subjective as well. So language is based upon the concepts of reason. Okay, so we reason and then we put it through language, and therefore, if reason is subjective, then language is subjective as well. And logical contradiction is neither a sign of failure nor of anything particularly significant at all. Right? So Hegel said that logical contradiction is okay, is fine, whereas philosophers all the way from Aristotle, even before Aristotle, believed that logical contradictions do not exist. Right? Hegel said it's fine, and Heidegger also said that it is fine. And then feelings, finally. Feelings, especially morbid feelings of anxiety and dread, are a deeper guide than reason. So he put feelings above reason. Right? So he said, if we cannot trust reason, then what is that thing that we can trust? The Europeans, they got rid of religion. Okay, they cannot go back to religion. So reason, the German philosophers have also attacked reason in some sense, and they have accepted contradiction. And they've said that reason is subjective, so we cannot rely upon it as well. So what is that thing now remaining that we can rely upon? Heidegger said it's going to be our feelings, okay? And that is what is going to define postmodernism. Okay, so all of this is very abstract. I know it's very difficult to understand, and probably people have to revisit it a few times in order to understand it. But how did all of it turn into activism, right? Seep through the masses. So the answer lies here. Anyone knows who these two people are? On the
Karl
top?
Marx,
Karl Marx, yeah.
Stalin.
No, that's not. Karl Marx, collaborator, his name was Friedrich Engels. Okay. So, anyone is familiar with Marxism? What is Marxism?
Basically, communism. The idea of communism came from Marxism. That there's a ruling class of workers and there's a proletariats. There's an exploitation system.
Very good. Okay. So,
I only know that much.
anyone else? Sir, you write on economics?
It's the start with simple things. Mostly he is one of the starter of shifting from the religious control economic system to a more modernized system, regardless of religions, and introduced with it the prohibited thing, which is riba or interest, and then spreading that in a more banking system at the beginning. That's basically what.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's explain where Karl Marx is coming from. Okay, so we discussed the dialectic which Hegel proposed, that there is a thesis, okay, there's accepted set of values, and there's an antithesis. Okay, and then after that, they two clash, and then there's a synthesis, and this is how society moves forward. Karl Marx was a materialist. Materialist meaning that he did not believe in these ideas and stuff, right? So he did not believe in that. So he believed in concrete materials. He believed that only materials exist. Okay. So he said that, okay, I accept the dialectic of Hegel, but I do not accept that it is because of ideas that the society's progress. He said that it is because of the economic system that the society's progress, right? So he gave his own theory. So his theory was, if I'm going to summarize, was like this, right? So you have the society is divided into two things. Okay, he called it base and superstructure. So the base, he called it the forces of production and the relations of production. So he said that everything is a derivative of an economic system. And that economic system is based upon two things. One is the base and the other is the superstructure. So the base, he called it forces of production, which means the labor, the technology, those are forces of production. Okay? So you labor, they employ technology to produce things. Okay? So everything that is involved in producing substances, they are forces of production. Okay? And then he said that there are relations of production. So in order for human societies to produce efficiently, right, and to engage in economics, they have to engage in relations as well. Okay? So let's say you sign a contract with a company, now you are an employee and you have an employer, right? So there's a relationship between an employee and an employer. Okay? So he says that the forces of production is the labor, right? Let's say the labor, the technology, and the relations of production is the relationships that people enter into in order to produce things. So they form the basis of the society. And then from this basis of the society, which is the economical system, everything else emerges. Okay? Religion, ideas, laws, systems, everything else emerges from this. Okay? And he called everything else that emerges from the economic system, he called it superstructure. Okay? He said that the superstructure is based upon the base, which is based upon the economic system. Right? So if you are going to ask Karl Marx, right, why did Islam, right, why did Muhammad came with this message, he would say that it was because in order to bring a type of new economic system. Right? So everything depends upon an economic system. So religion and everything else is false. It is just based, it is just, you can say, the fire is the economic system and the smoke is religion, ideas and everything else, right? They directly emanate from the economic system. And then he said that this economic system, which is the base of the society, is constantly evolving. And he said that the first economic system that the humans enter when they're primitive is the primitive communism, basically tribal system. So people, they're collaborating with each other, they have a barter economy, exchanging goods. Okay? And then after primitive communism comes the slave society. So he says that now after primitive communism, the forces of production, which is the technology and the people, the knowledge increases, the technology becomes better, right? So now there's a revolution. So now after that revolution, the society goes to another stage. So after primitive communism, the society goes to a slave society. And then in a slave society, there's a master, there's a slave, right? So there's a hierarchy. Then after the slave society, then the technology again further increases and people become smarter and smarter. So then another revolution happens, and from the slave society, people go to another kind of economic system, which is called feudalism. Okay, so feudalism basically means that you have got nobility, and under that nobility you have got tenants, and under those tenants you have got serfs. So that is what used to happen in medieval Europe. So you had the king, and the king used to grant lands to the nobility, okay, to the nobles. Probably used to be the relatives of the king, okay, so they used to hold large lands, and they would supply armed. So the contract was that the king is going to give them lands, and they're going to supply armed forces to the king. Okay, so if there is an attack, he's going to ask his nobles to supply this much amount of men, and the nobles have to supply. Okay? Now under those nobles, they had the vassals, okay? The tenants of the noble. So noble is going to distribute his land amongst his tenants, his vassals. Okay? And under those vassals, you had the serfs. The serfs were the workers. So now this was the hierarchical system in the feudal societies. So he said that is the next step from slave society. That is the next stage in evolution. And then he said the next stage after feudalism is capitalism, in which you have what he said, bourgeoisie, okay, and you have got the proletariat. Okay? So bourgeoisie is the capitalist who owns the means of production, and you have got the proletariat who is the labor, okay, who is the worker. And then he said that since we are living in a society which is dominated by capitalism, because Marx was living in the 1800s, which was the society that was dominated by classical capitalism, he said that the next step is going to be socialism. So the workers, they are going to realize technology is going to increase, the workers are going to become smarter, and they are going to realize that the bourgeoisie is exploiting them and alienating them, and therefore what they would do is that they would revolt against the bourgeoisie, and they would overthrow the bourgeoisie, and the means of production are going to be under the people, under the society. So that is socialism. And then after socialism, the final utopia is communism, which means that you have got a classless society, you have got a completely equal society in which everyone is equal, okay? And stateless society as well. So there is no state, there is no class, and everyone is equal. So that is what Karl Marx proposed.
Blockchain.
And he also made a few predictions. The predictions I've already mentioned it, but let me just reiterate them. So proletariat will increase in number and become poorer. Okay? So the capitalists, they're going to squeeze as much money as they can from the proletariat, and therefore they're going to increase more and more, and they're going to become poorer. And the middle class would decrease to a very small percentage. Okay, as the upper class, they are extracting more and more money, so the middle class, it's going to go mostly towards the poor class. Okay? So the poor class is going to be populated by the middle class. Sorry, the former middle class is going to become poor class. So poor class is going to increase and increase, and the capitalists at the top are going to decrease, and they're going to have more and more power. So that is what Marx said. And then capitalism is exploitative, alienating, and ultimately less productive and less moral than socialism. That is what Karl Marx said. Less productive and less moral. Okay. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the ensuing class conflict will cause capitalism collapse in the end. Okay. So he said that because of the class conflict, because the proletariat is no longer be able to bear the isolation and the exploitation by the bourgeoisie, then the proletariat is going to rebel against the bourgeoisie and is going to overthrow the bourgeoisie. Okay? So that is what Karl Marx predicted. But what happened? Any idea? What happened in reality?
Communism has always been a dictatorship. With
What happened in reality was that his predictions failed. Okay? His predictions failed. So middle class increased in number. He said that they are going to decrease, but they increased. Statistically, they increased in capitalist societies. Okay, and there were worker rights and groups and stuff. They were also established, and therefore the employee, they got more rights than they had in the 1800s. Okay? Probably because maybe because they were scared of communist revolution, maybe, but still the employees, they got more rights than before. Okay, and then the capitalists also, by the start of the 20th century, about 80% of the wealth was owned by 1% of the people. Okay, in the United States, if I'm not mistaken, but now it's about 60% or 60 or 61%. So the concentration of wealth also, it got redistributed to some extent, not that much of course, but to some extent it got redistributed. So that prediction of Karl Marx was failed. And the final prediction, the most important prediction, was that there's going to be a revolution and the people are going to rise against the bourgeoisie and they're going to overthrow all of them, and that never happened. Right? So the Marxists who bought into the idea of Karl Marx, they kept on waiting, they kept on waiting, they kept on waiting, but nothing happened. Okay? Now, what instead happened were the two world wars. Okay? So the First World War happened, and then after the First World War, then the Marxists were like, okay, so now this is going to be the end of capitalism. But then the capitalism survived, and in the 1930s the Great Depression happened. And then the Marxists again, the Great Depression was the economic crisis that happened after World War. So the Marxists said that this is the last nail in the coffin. After the Great Depression, the proletariat are going to rise and there's going to be a revolution. But then the capitalist economies, they recovered from the Great Depression. And then after that, in the 1940s, again another war, the great 1930s and 40s, the World War II, the most deadliest conflict, it also happened. And then that was the final hope of the Marxists. Okay? So they believed that now the proletariat are going to rise up against the capitalists, but then again it did not happen. So Karl Marx also predicted that the most advanced capitalist societies are going to be the ones that are going to embrace socialism the first. They are going to be the first that are going to embrace socialism. Okay? And he predicted that Britain is going to be the first country which is going to embrace socialism and is going to overthrow the bourgeoisie. But what happened was that the nation that he described as backward, Russia, it adopted communism and socialism instead of Britain. Okay? So Britain and the United States and the West, it remained largely capitalist. Okay? So Karl Marx predictions failed totally. So now after that, after Karl Marx predictions failed, then there was another school that emerged that believed in Karl Marx, but they said that we have to tweak some of the theories of Karl Marx. Okay, so they are applicable, but we have to change some of the theories of Karl Marx. Okay, not the entire theory, but some aspects of the theory we have to change it. Okay? Now those people became neo-Marxists. So they were the ones who believed in the Karl Marx theory, but they also said that there are other fields that we need to incorporate into Marx theory as well. Okay? So they said, okay, we are going to incorporate the feminist literature into Karl Marx theories, right? We are going to incorporate critical theory. So critical theory is basically critically analyzing the structures of the society in order to show how they are related to power. Okay, so let's say a critical theorist would say that a certain law system is there in the society because it supports the power structure. Okay, or a certain, let's say, language is prevalent in a society because it supports the power structure. Okay? So neo-Marxists started to synthesize this into their literature, into the Marxist literature as well. Okay? Now after that, there were some neo-Marxists who said that, okay, how do we challenge the dominant liberal capitalist because order that is there, right? Capitalist order that is there. Because the predictions of socialism, right, and the socialist state all over the world, they were failing. Right? So what they decided was, they said that we are going to go on the lines of these people, right? The German post-Enlightenment philosophers that rejected reason. We are going to adopt their epistemology, we are going to adopt their philosophy, and we are going to use that in order to attack the basis of modernity. Okay? So we try to say that Marx tried to say that the economic system of capitalism is corrupt and the people are going to rise against it, but the people did not rise against it. So what we are going to do now is that we are going to attack the very basis of modernity. Okay? We are going to attack it philosophically. So that is what neo-Marxists did. And they came to a conclusion as well, right? So they were trying to theorize in their mind, why are the people not rising up? Okay? And the conclusion that they came up was that people are not rising up because the dominant ideologies that are prevalent in the society, they support the power structure. Okay? And they brainwash people in some sense that they are living good lives. But our job now is to tell people that they are being brainwashed, that they are living good lives, but we are going to tell them that they are being controlled by the dominant bourgeoisie. Okay? So that was the ruling. I mean, that was the methodology that the new Marxists adopted. Now, when the new Marxists, some of them, they adopted the anti-rational philosophies of the German ideologues, the German idealists. Then what happened was that they realized, because the German idealist like Nietzsche, he said that every perspective is subjective. I mean, not every perspective is subjective. Every truth is subjective. Okay? So then they realized that if we are holding on to this truth called neo-Marxism, okay, this itself is a truth. Okay, we are selling it like it is a truth. Okay? So now we have to move out of it, and we have to say that there's no such thing as truth. Okay? So now we have adopted the epistemology of the German irrationalist. So now we have to adopt it completely, and we have to move out of this neo-Marxist mentality, and we have to say that now everything is subjective, nothing is the truth. So now from this evolution of Marxism, Marxism then first went to neo-Marxism, right? And then some neo-Marxism, they realized that the epistemology, the philosophy that they have adopted, it necessitates subjectivity. Okay, so if it necessitates subjectivity, then how come we are telling other people that neo-Marxism is the truth, right? So we have to come out of it, and then we have to attack truth itself, right? We don't have to tell people that neo-Marxism is the truth. Okay? So these people became post-Marxists. Okay, so now these people became post-Marxists, and then these post-Marxists then are going to lead the postmodern revolution. Any questions up till here? It's going to be, I mean, it was a lot, to be honest. It's very difficult to explain the origins of postmodernism. Yeah.
Is dialectic materialism part of Marxism or something else?
Dialectic materialism is what I explained, right? So Karl Marx said that you have the dialectic idealism was what Hegel said. Okay, Hegel said that there is a thesis, there is an antithesis, and then they collide, and there is a synthesis. Okay, so these are ideas that change in a society. But Karl Marx said that it is not the ideas, it is the clash between the classes. Okay, so that is dialectic materialism. That you have got a dominant class, let's say the bourgeoisie, and then you have got the proletariat. Okay. Now the forces of production, they are going to change. Maybe the labor class is going to become more intelligent. They are going to have better technologies. Now that is going to lead to a clash between the two opposing classes, the bourgeoisie and the worker. Okay, the proletariat. Now after that clash, there's going to be a new revolution. Okay, and then he said that the revolution is going to be from primitive communism to slave economy to feudalism, then capitalism, then socialism, then finally communism. Okay, so that is dialectic materialism. So the postmodernists are by their roots they are Marxist. Okay, and when the Marxist philosophy, when the Marxist ideology and the Marxist way of looking at things, when it married with the German irrational philosophy, right? They gave a child which is called postmodern. Okay, so that is how I would describe it. So now the postmodernist, I would, as we described, that they looked at neo-Marxism and they said that Marxist philosophy, it privileges class difference above everything else. Right? So it says that it is the class difference basically which drives society. Okay, so the clash of classes, let's say the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, that is what is going to drive progress in the society. Now, because they have assumed subjectivity, so they said, why are we privileging class above any other, let's say, any other identifier, right? Let's say class, any other identifier, let's say gender, right? So gender should be incorporated as well, or race, that should be incorporated as well. So the post-Marxists, they move beyond the class dialectic, that there is a clash between the classes, and they move beyond that, and they said that it's not the clash between the classes, it's the clash between the power structure and different groups, right? So the power structure, and let's say the power structure can be males, okay? Now there's a clash between the males and the oppressed, right, the females, right? Or they would say there's a power structure, the white man is at the top, and there's a clash between the white man, right? So if there's someone who looks at it from a race perspective, he's going to say that there's a clash between the white man and the rest of the races. Okay, so different, you can say different ways that people are, you can say different markers of people, right? So how would I put it? Different identities of people, right? So gender, race, right? So they all incorporated that, and they said that it is not just the class which is clashing; it's the power structure which is clashing with different groups. Okay, and then after that, you have certain philosophers that came in the 16th and the 70s, and they developed a few theories, right? So the philosophers such as Michel Foucault, or Michel Foucault. So Michel Foucault. Anyone knows about Michel Foucault? Heard about him? So he was a professor in the University of Tunis as well. For 2 years he was a professor in Tunisia. Right? Very famous in academia, not amongst the people, but in academia he's probably the most quoted person in social sciences. Michel Foucault. So Michel Foucault was an interesting character, to say the least, and that is what he said, right? So let me just read what he said. So truth is a thing of this world. It is produced only by virtue of multiple forms of constraint, and it induces regular effects of power. So he said basically truth is nothing but related to power. Okay, so people invent truth in order to keep power. That is what he said. Okay, each society has its regime of truth, its general politics of truth. So every society has its own truth. Okay, and which is related to power structures. So let's say the power structures, the people at the top, they invent these truths in order to keep their power. And the types of discourse which it accepts and makes function as true. So Michel Foucault, if you're going to read him, so he has, you can say, how would I put it? It's very interesting, to say the least, right? So it's interesting. It's a bit. So let me just give you an example. Right? So he wrote a book in which he said he's criticizing the modern world. Okay? So in the modern world, you have got these mental hospitals in which the people who are mentally they are not well, so they go there, right, and they get special care. Right? And he said that the general assumption is.
Press the admit button.
Oops, sorry. Michel Foucault said that the general assumption is that the mental hospitals are very humane. Right? We have made progress. The Enlightenment era, classical Enlightenment assumption that we are making progress, and hence we have made a progress, and these mental hospitals are better than what we used to have back in the days. Okay, so that is the general assumption that is what people believe in. But Michel Foucault challenged it. He said that back in the days, people who were a bit crazy, they used to be accepted in the society. Maybe some people would go to them to get their blessings as well. Okay, and they would be normal parts of society. Now we have institutionalized them, and we have made them into something that is different from us. So that is what Michel Foucault said. So this is a subtle way of attacking modernity. So modernity says that we have made progress, we are becoming better humans, and Michel Foucault said that that's not really the case, right? So if we have special hospitals for mental people, so that does not mean we have made lives better for mental people. And he said that the lives of people who were mentally retarded were better back in the days that they were in this day and age, right? So very attractive way of looking at things. I mean, very attractive to a Muslim who wants to attack enlightenment, or not attack, but who wants to, you can say, refute some of the ideals of enlightenment. Okay, but there are many dangers in assuming the kind of philosophy that postmodernists say, right? Which we are going to discuss in the next slide, inshallah. Okay? And there's another guy called Jean-François, right? Jean-François Lyotard. Okay, and he says that simplifying to the extreme, I define postmodern as an incredulity towards meta-narratives. So what he means is that postmodernism opposes all meta-narratives. So meta-narratives means that narrative that everyone believes in. Okay, so let's say Islam, you can say, is sort of a narrative that everyone believes in. Okay, let's say Jean-François will say that religion is a narrative, right, that everyone believes in. But there should be no meta-narrative. Everything should be subjective. So he said that postmodernism opposes everything that claims to be a meta-narrative, okay, including religion. And then another one wrote, he said that vocabularies are made by human beings, so are truths. So truths, the concepts are explained through language, right? And therefore, since language vocabularies are made by human beings, so the truth is also made by human beings. So basically what he's saying is, the concept of truth is made up. There is no such thing as truth. Now, if I have not confused you enough, let's just describe postmodernism. Okay, so from now on, it's going to be much easier. So modernism, let's contrast modernism with postmodernism. So postmodernism if we are going to summarize, it was born out of the Marxist boom, right? So Marxist, when it married with German idealism, right? German attack on reason, right? Then because they wanted to oppose the capitalistic order which is there in the world, so they took on many of the features of German idealism and they tried to attack modernity, right? The very ideals of modernity that we have mentioned here. Okay? And that led to postmodernism, what we believe in what we right now call postmodernism. And postmodernism opposes the modernity and the ideas that modernity proposed in a philosophical way, right? Rather than being an activist like Marxism. So the modernity, it says that man collectively is the measure of all things, right? So the first one is that removal of religion and God as the center of human activity, and man collectively is the measure of all things. That is what the modernists said. Okay? Postmodernists said that individual is the measure of all things, and not just the individual, but the feelings of an individual. Since because we cannot trust rationality, reason, it's inherently contradictory. So it's going to be the feelings of an individual that is going to be the measure of all things. Okay? Now, modernists say that reason and science provide accurate, objective, reliable foundation of knowledge, right? And that can lead to universal truths all cultures can embrace. Easy, right? So reason and science, they provide objective truths, and those objective truths are applicable to all cultures, all societies. Okay? And postmodernists say that reason and science, they're ideologies and they're subjective and they're theory-laden. So theory-laden means that a scientist, let's say, a postmodernist would say that scientist has come to a particular conclusion because he accepted theories previously, right? So because he was seeing the observations based on the lens of the theories that he had already accepted previously. Okay? That is why he came to a conclusion. A good example would be, let me think of a good example. Anyone can think of an example? So let's say Isaac Newton, right? So Isaac Newton said that the lights are particles. Now, after Isaac Newton said that lights are particles, and then the scientists now, because he was Isaac Newton, so they said that it will be true that lights are particles. So they started performing experiments in order to calculate the density of light particles. Okay? So a postmodernist would say, look, this is theory-laden. Because he accepted Isaac Newton's theory that lights are particles, now he's performing experiments based upon that acceptance of the theory of Isaac Newton. Okay? So that is theory-ladenness, that you see the observation based upon the previous theories that you have already accepted. And in this way they attack science and they say that the scientific theories are just subjective. Right? So you can have your scientific theory, another person can have another interpretation of the same. There's a same. They do not deny objective reality. They do not deny reality in itself, but they say that the observations can have infinite interpretations. Okay? So maybe scientist A will have this interpretation, scientist B is going to have another interpretation. Maybe if everyone in the world is going to start doing science, it is possible that everyone is going to have different interpretations. Okay? So they reject a set scientific theory. And then modernism states that reason transcends and exists independently of our existential, historical, cultural context. It is universal and true. Okay, so they say that basically reason can achieve objective truths. Okay, so that is what modernism was all about. That we can achieve truths through reason. Okay, and postmodernism, of course, they reject it. They say that there is no such thing as universal truths. Okay, everything is subjective. There is only personal truth. There is no such thing as universal truth. And all judgments of truth exist within a cultural context. Okay, so in your context, truth might be different. In his context, truth might be different. Maybe someone from Tunisia, truth might be different for him than someone from Pakistan or someone from India, right? So that is what the postmodernist says. Very relative. And then a modernist would say that language is transparent. So you can basically, through language, you can accurately describe what is out there. Okay, that is what modernists would say. Okay. Postmodernists would say, no. It's not the case. Language is also subjective and it is fluid. So it is what you write something and what someone else is going to interpret, right? So different people are going to interpret it differently. Okay? So language cannot present a unified meaning. It just depends on how you interpret the language. So let's say Anwar interpret some text, right, in a way, so that is as relevant as maybe Ahmad interpreted in some other way, right? So let's say a scholar interpreting the Quran in some way is as relevant as some layman interpreting the Quran, right? So a postmodernist, by that lens, is going to say both of them are just opinions, they are subjective, so both of their opinions are going to have an equal weight.
So the postmodernism puts them all in the
Yes.
same level.
Yes,
So they don't even believe that some are more like better in one way or another.
because of their Marxist roots. Karl Marx believed that utopia, everyone is equal. Okay, so because of their Marxist roots, they believe that everyone has the equal right to interpret how they want. Okay, now, and but not all. I'm generalizing. Like it's like postmodernism. There are just so many variants, right? But many of them, especially amongst the masses, right, they believe that everyone is entitled to their own interpretation. And then human conditions continue to progress, hence new is better. Right? So this is the mantra of enlightenment, right? Progress. We are moving, we're heading in a good direction, right? So we are better today than we were yesterday. Right? So we are more moral, we have more technology, right? So that is what the modernists would say. And the postmodernists would say, no, look at all the wars that we have committed. Okay? World War I was after modernity. World War II was after modernity. The Great Depression was after modernity. Okay? So that is why you cannot say that there is a linear progression. That there is a linear progression. Okay? So they reject it as well. And then moderns would say that laws of nature apply to human beings. Okay? So that was the theme of modernity, that laws of nature apply to human beings, and postmodernists they reject it as well. And they say that there is no such thing as laws of nature. Okay? There is no such thing as truth, so they reject it. And then finally, freedom in the form of democracy and free markets are the natural extension of universally true reasonable beliefs. So modernists believe that freedom in terms of democracy, in terms of individual expression, right? In terms of capitalism, which gives freedom to invest, right? So free markets. So that is the true freedom. Okay? Whereas postmodern believes that freedom is, since there are no true beliefs, freedom is removal of foundational metaphysics and assumptions and the ability to set up own discourses, reasons and justifications. Okay? So postmodern believes that there should not be any meta-narrative, there should not be any prevailing idea that permeates to everyone, that everyone should be allowed to express their feelings, everyone should be allowed to create their own morality, create their own justifications, right? That is true freedom.
Open their own self.
Yeah. That is true freedom. Okay. So that is modernism and postmodernism in a nutshell. So now this postmodernism, if you look at Michel Foucault and you look at Richard Rorty, and you look at Jean-François Lyotard, so these people were highly cited, and the postmodernists, they became very dominant in the academia. Okay? They, of course, these ideas, any human being is not going to accept. These are absurd ideas. Okay? So these are against the fitra as well. Right? So you are just, there is no such thing as truth. We have all believed in truth, right? There is no such thing as contradiction. We all believe in contradiction since, I don't know, since Aristotle in written memory, but I don't know, since Adam alayhi salam, so we all believe in contradiction, right? So this is against human nature. So now, but these people in academia, they became, the postmodernists, they became prominent in academia, okay? And in that sense, they started to permeate, they started to spread their ideals, right, postmodern ideals, and they started to, you can say, how would I put it? Tell the students, brainwash. What is a better word for brainwash? Can anyone help me?
Indoctrinate?
No, not indoctrinate. What is a milder word? Right?
Basically, that's why you've got postmodern.
Yeah, that is a contradiction in postmodernism, right? So they say there is no such thing as truth, but then they say as if it is the truth. Okay? So, but then, yeah, postmodernists have another way of answering it, which I'm not going to go into. It's mind-bending, right? So the postmodernists, they became the dominant in academia, especially in social sciences. So they started to tell all of their ideologies to their students. Okay, and so this is how, when postmodern beliefs, they combined with feminism, with post-colonial studies, right, that were developing in parallel, or some of them were absorbed into postmodernism as well, right? So all of them, and also because of the neoliberal order, right? So we cannot deny that there is racism, that there are many injustice and atrocities that take place in the West, right? So all of that combined then gave up to this culture which we call woke culture today. Okay? So this culture in which people get cancelled, right, and stuff like that, right? So it is basically postmodern academia influencing their students and indoctrinating them about them being active, that everything, that truth is related to power, there's no such thing as truth. And then the students seeing the things that are prevalent in the society as the things that are there in order to support certain power structures. Okay? Now that combines with feminism, combines with critical theories, combined with post-colonial studies, right? And that leads to woke activism, right? So let me give you an example. So an Enlightenment, a modern feminist, right, would say that males, right, have been oppressing females, right? If everyone is equal, therefore male and female must also be equal. Okay? But males have considered them superior throughout history, and therefore we should have equality between male and female. Okay? So that is what a modern feminist would say, right? That was basically a second wave feminism. And now, when postmodern ideals they mix with feminism, right? So that they give rise to what we call postmodern feminism, which is the third wave feminism. Okay? Now, postmodern feminists would say that gender itself is a social construct. Right? So you would say that this gender thing, male, female, they are just social construct in order to support power structure. Okay? You can express yourself however you want, right? So you can be a male, you can be a female can feel like a female can feel like a male, right? So these things, right? So this is the difference between how the modernists would interpret the world and see the world, and how postmodernists would interpret and see the world. Okay? So now postmodernism is combining with different disciplines, right? Gave rise to this activism. Now there are many similarities between postmodernism and woke activism. So the first one is that, I mean, of course we cannot generalize it, but mostly it is true. Okay? The first one is that they propose more moral and ideological relativism. Okay? So a woke activist would say, let's say that, okay, so any religion, right? We should not privilege any religion above any other religion, right? We should not privilege any race above any other race, right? All of them are equal. Okay? So that is what you might have heard as well, right? So moral and ideological relativism. So one morality is not better than another morality. Both of them are same, right? As long as you have the freedom to ascribe to any morality, you can do it. All of them have equal value. Okay? And another is the fight against the hegemony and hierarchies. Okay? So the hegemony is the power structure which is in place, right? And the hierarchies are put in place, and therefore which support the power structure, and therefore we have to fight against it. Okay? So now that fight can be a cultural fight, a cultural war, or a racial war, right? Let's say white against the blacks or against the browns and stuff like that, right? Can be familiar, so male against female or whatever, right? So these hierarchies are put in place in order to support the cultural hegemony of the powerful people, and they have to be fought against. Okay, so these are the similarities between postmodernism and woke activism. Okay? And then finally, two more. So structures, example, vernacular, support hierarchies and have to be fought. Okay, so the structures that are present. Let me give you an example, right? So the language that we use, a postmodernist would say, or a woke activist would say, many of them, of course, no generalization, but many would say that the language that we have, that we use, is basically there in order to support a certain hegemony. So they would say, let's say in the language we say that bright is a good thing, right? Or white is a good thing, black is a bad thing, right? So that was developed in order to support white superiority over the blacks. Okay? That is what postmodernist woke activists would usually say. And other things as well, right? So the justice system is there to support the powerful against the poor, and anything that you can think of, right? The structures that are present in the society, they're basically there in order to support the powerful against the weak. Okay? So therefore they have to be fought against. And then they believe in gender as a social construct. Right? So gender is a social construct. So it is fluid. You can it is just when I say male, when I say female, and I ascribe gender roles. Right? So they are just a social construct. You can get rid of them, and you can feel however you want, and you can basically do whatever you want. Right? So you guys all know it, probably better than me. Okay. So okay. So now I think I'm going to stop speaking because I've spoken a lot. So I have some questions for you guys. Maybe you guys can answer it. So now we see in the West, right? So these activism, postmodern philosophy, it is just taking root in the West a lot. Right? Not so much in the Eastern world, but in the West, amongst the Muslims as well. Many Muslims are very active, right, in these kind of things. Okay? So why do you think it makes it attractive to Muslims? Any idea?
I think the most attractive thing it would be to Muslims would be the post-colonialism part of it.
Yeah, very good, very good. Why?
Oh, because the history of the last 200 years, most of the Muslim world was colonized by one nation or another, mostly white nations.
Yeah. All white nations. So,
aside from that, I guess it would extend by the fact that the current Muslims who live in those areas, they want to fight a class war or a race war against the establishment. I guess that's why it appeals to them.
yeah, very good.
Because
So-
Muslims are the ones who are most in need of understanding, so that they can do something. So the ones who realize this, probably they're attracted to it.
Yeah, so they are attracted because it is attacking some of the ideals of enlightenment, right? So some of the things that are used to bash Muslims, it is directly attacking it. Okay? So now, such as colonialism and stuff, like, so it attacks colonialism, says that colonialism was a hegemony of one culture above another, right? So this is completely unacceptable. Okay? So that is what they say, and the Muslims, of course, they have been colonized, as I said. So therefore, it is attractive to them that we ally ourselves with people who are attacking colonialism, just like we don't like colonialism, they don't like colonialism as well. So therefore, there can be some sort of collusion, right? So that is what attracts Muslims. And another thing which I pointed out as well, very aptly, was that the Muslims maybe who live in the West in some areas, maybe they suffer from racial discrimination, right? Or maybe from religious discrimination, right? And there's these activists, right? These people who say that we do not prefer anyone above anyone else, so you are equal to us, so you can join us, and we can fight against the racial hegemony, the religious hegemony, or whatever, right? So we can fight against it, and we can create an equal world. Right? So therefore, it is attractive to Muslims, because especially the young Muslims, because when they encounter when they encounter racism, when they encounter someone who's abusing them, right, abusing their religion, so therefore, if there's someone who basically forwards a hand for friendship and says that, okay, we are going to combine, we are going to do it together, and we are going to remove all of these hegemonies, so therefore Muslims are attracted towards it. Okay. And another question is, which is the most, we can say the most apt question, the most relevant question, the most important question is that what are the potential implications, right? So if, let's say I'm a young Muslim guy, and maybe I have suffered from some racism, and I'm very attracted to the postmodernist philosophies, to woke activism, and I go and I completely dedicate myself to activism, right, woke activism. So what can be the potential implications?
A lot of shirk,
Maybe this is going to help.
a lot of shirk, a lot of fitna, I guess.
Explain it. Lot of shirk, lot of fitna.
To be fair to him, you mean at that period of time, 200 years back or 300 years ago, that time the westernized world were not looking at whatever under the North Africa, South Africa, or Asia total. They were looking at themselves, and naturally that location of the world were in preparation to become the superpower, economically, militarily, or wherever. Karl Marx shows up with the ideas of modernization or away from religions, which also had a clash of itself at that time, from the religious people of Christians mostly, and Jews as well. Today's as us, with knowledge of internet, thank God, and the knowledge of communications, puts us in a position of direct clash with them. Remember that time the Ottoman Empire were dying, so it was looked at as a bash that way. at that time also they were rising star. So that's why they had their own clash by themselves. Today, what we are asking as Muslims or as the underdog, they call it, maybe, the only way is to fight them back. Communism or the capitalism's ideas is baby in comparison to the culture of Islam that had been working well in the socialism of Islam and the common laws of that the Quran. That base is way stronger than whatever those babies shows up in the new ideas implemented on the structure of Islam that had worked well, and it's also can work well for years infinitely wise. Simply because, to me, you are not German, and I'm not, let's say, Chinese or something. To me, you are one identity, which is one nationality, which is Islamic nationalities. And that's why we call ourselves brothers, but they cannot call themselves, no matter what is a communist, can call themselves friends or brothers or whatever, but still there is a segregation, and we can see it as we see them, probably. Even the communist countries, which is quote unquote Ukraine, are fighting with the communist post type to that with Russians as well. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So postmodernism is the natural conclusion to when you remove God from the equation. Right? So you don't have anything to base your values
So
on.
that's why they had their own fights with the religious people.
Yeah, yeah. So the Enlightenment philosophers, they thought they're building some kind of utopia, but when you remove God from the equation, right, when you say that, okay, we are going to base it upon a reason, then that reason is going to be subjective, right? It's going to be my opinion versus your opinion. So the final conclusion is postmodernism, that everything is subjective, there's no such thing as truth. So Muslims, they can ground their morality, they can ground their economic system, they can ground their religion into something which is objective, that is God, right? Allah revealed. So we have a grounding, right? And we have a morality that is not changing, right? So tomorrow maybe some alim is not going to come up and say, okay, you can kill this guy or you can do this or that, right? So it is unchanging, right? Whereas the morality, after you remove God from the equation, then the morality just becomes your whims and desires, right? Whatever you think of as moral is whatever the Enlightenment philosophers thought of as moral became the moral thing, and came to be advertised as good. But now, postmodernism, they are saying that no, we are not going to believe in any philosophy. They are going to just, every individual should do whatever she wants to do, or whatever he, she, whatever, right? There are many now pronouns. So, yeah, so what will be the implications, let's say if I am a woke activist and I have just dedicated myself to activism, right? And I am calling myself a Muslim.
I mean, you're going at the basic tenets of Islam, right?
How?
I mean, you can take any example.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a long list. I think it's quite obvious during all the discussion here.
Right, so maybe I will come to a conclusion which many Muslims have come to a conclusion in the West, that look, Islam is just another religion, right? It proclaims the truth, but we do not believe that it is for everyone, right? So my truth, let's say many people say there are many paths to God, whereas in the Quran it just clearly says that there is only one path to God, which is Islam, right? So I've seen many Muslims say, okay, there are many, you can be this, you can be that, it doesn't matter, you can just reach God through other religions, there's no one true religion, okay? So this is one of the consequences, right? So if you're going to concretely buy yourself into this sort of, you can say, the worship of the nafs, then we are going to, of course, we are going to have these warped beliefs, which can potentially take you out of the fold of Islam as well, okay? And anything else?
So there's maybe one thought that might come to the mind of a thinking person who was born in a Muslim family or a Muslim world, and who now is exposed to activism and all this. This person will come and say, okay, so why is it that we live at all and if then the truth has been there in a book, forever, and there's no maybe place for human creativity to lead the way human beings live. They see it maybe as a diminish, as like a diminishment of individuals and of human being contribution to the world. So how would you answer a person who said this?
Wait for next lecture. Next lecture is on this. Yeah. Next week is on this. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, it's not that difficult. It's easy.
Okay.
So yep.
Can I maybe address some of the statements from the brother here? Maybe
Who brother?
Anas. Anas brother, brothers of Nam. Nice to meet you. It's like I personally feel the argument about history, using history as a basis for validation is quite dangerous. It's like we talk about, let's suppose, Islam is 1400, 1500 years old. Someone can say, not someone, people do say, Chinese civilization is 5,000 years old. And like Jews can claim even longer. I think like historical longevity as a basis for validation, for me personally, doesn't make sense. You can go as far back as you like, right? But I think for Islam, it's quite clear. Maybe my interpretation is wrong, correct? Like Islam started from the first man, Adam, right?
Definitely. But also, let's say for example, let's be modern more. The modern world, like you and I, let's say Jews have had the religion came to them, luckily, to a certain level, and even though it wasn't played with, due to the fact there was no structure, like written Bible that has been kept, where it was always forged. As well as Quran, probably right now, if it wasn't written as a Quran, if it's kept like Old Testaments, we'd have lost it, right? Had it been lost, right now we wouldn't be sitting here talking about the same subjects. But because it was in a last prophet had been implemented or forced it to be memorized and forced it to be unchangeable, thank God, then it has been structured. But when Prophet Muhammad has had implemented the teaching of economic structure, it was already based into the logic. And man would have been permitted wrongly by Jews and as well as Christian, which was only 650 years prior to that. But it was the Christianity has started to be changed 50 years after Christ being resurrected. So that the Islam, although it was very virtually newer than 5,000 years before, but it came with a structure written and don't change it. This is the constitution, and then whatever comes up, like the Marxism, they were trying to find the glitches to go away, and they wipe away the Jewish, which prohibited them from using the riba, which is the interest, and the Christianity, which also did prohibited that, and they tried to force it in between. They weren't looking at Islam as threat; they were looking at themselves as a threat. So then, after that, they passed it. They became stronger communities. But what for us, from Malaysia and Indonesia on the east, and Kashgar, all the way to the west, it was one written book. We cannot change it. So you and I just born this past 20, 30, 40 years, or 55 years for me, just born. And we found out that I cannot change it. Although I was, let's say, maybe, I could have been atheist. I don't want to believe what my mom and dad had prayed for. And then one day I wake up, I found that structure there. But for him, Marx, and what happens to him? He had the Soviet Union and had the power, superpower. What happened after that? They collapsed within each other. Still had no structure that somebody had to use them as a value. Maybe that should answer part of it.
What about colonialism? So if I'm a woke activist and I'm against colonialism, I'm against any culture imposing itself on another culture. What if some guy comes up and says, look man, where are you from? You're from India, you're from Pakistan, but Islam was in Arabia. How did it come in India? How did it come in Pakistan? So what would be the answer?
It's actually a very fair point.
Huh? Huh? So you will be like, oh, you will have doubts about Islam after that. Right? So you will say, oh, maybe Islam was a colonial project as well, which I've heard people say that, oh, Islam also came through other. Islam also went through these colonial projects and started in India and started invading other countries and stuff and imposed their ideology on the other countries. I've heard people who proclaim to be Muslims say that. Right? So, of course, there are ways to. I've already answered it previously as well. I can answer it again as well. So, if anyone has questions, can ask me. So, yep. So this can be a big problem. So anything that you are going to use to attack the West using postmodern philosophy, you can use it easily against Islam. So perhaps even easier.
So say again, you hit a very, very critical point. You
Yeah.
say, what if, for example, as an example, India or Islamic countries start attacking others? Let's say Pakistan attack India. Would that be colonializations?
No. I said that because Islam spread
Yeah.
from Arabia, it spread through military activity.
Mm.
So now a postmodern who says that any military activity is colonialism, it's
Correct.
imposition, so
Yes.
he's going to look at Islamic history as colonialism as well. Okay, that Islam.
But there is a point. Of course,
There's a difference. Of course, there's a difference. Yeah, there's a.
Even then and that now, if there is an attack, for example, Islam war in Ishbilia, which is Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal now, that time they had moved in with ideas without any changing of the laws, but by the time they already became Muslims, they became Muslim. Only places that has been taken is Constantinople was asked, we will come as Muslim. As Muslim. They refuse, they fight. In the fight, if you fight and you win, you can change the churches to become a mosque. But if you move in without a fight, such as they moved into Syria and they moved into Damascus, and they kept the churches the way they are until now, from then on. But if we move to if we get to move for economical reason, that became a colonialization. But if we came as a normal peaceful, let's say we take China, hopefully.
Let's not.
Let's take some other
That's a
country.
joke.
Yeah.
Any other culture.
No. Let's say if Islam became take China, for example, or Japan or something, and we took the parliament and we became the leadership, government of there. That is not correct. If you're a reason of, for example, to become a widespread military, that is wrong. But if we came in to move in as a peacefully, and they became Muslim more than just like what's happening in England as we speak now, more Muslims are spreading into the cultures. That is by itself, it is a cultural invasion, peaceful of course, which they might not like it today, but it will be part of living.
That is what far right says.
Right?
That is exactly what far right says. Yeah, Muslims are coming and culturally invading. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What about?
So, in your perspective, in your idea, should Muslims study philosophy?
Oh my God.
Or shouldn't they?
Should Muslims study philosophy? Well, I would discourage it, of course, because look, it depends. Yeah, I will give you the reason. I mean, you can disagree. It's just my opinion. Okay? So, how are you going to study philosophy? You are going to go to university. You are a 20, 21 year old. You are going to university. You will have an atheist professor, and from the first day, because I know from the first day he's going to start. You can say start skeptic. I mean, he's going to start marinating you, right? So he's going to say you things such as give you the arguments against God, right? So that is how philosophy classes usually start. There are arguments against God and stuff like that, right? So then usually you are going to slowly and gradually you are going to become a skeptic. Right? You are 20, 21 years old. You are not very used to the Islamic paradigm. You do not know the Islamic paradigm very well. Now, if you are going to go into such a skeptic environment, you are going to start questioning this Islamic paradigm. And once you start questioning the Islamic paradigm, you don't have the tools to answer those. So let's say you have not read Ghazali or Ibn Taymiyyah, it's extremely difficult to answer some of the questions that the philosophers are going to raise. It's possible, of course we can do it, it's not a problem. We can do it, it's not a problem. But for a 20, 21-year-old to go to a university, 18, 19-year-old, and to enroll in a philosophy class, and it's going to be very difficult really to stay away from the skepticism that philosophy develops. So that is why if you want to study philosophy, which is necessary, I would say, for some people, right? So those some people there who are grounded in the religion, right? So let's say I'm grounded in the religion, I know what Aqidah is, I know the Quran, I know the Hadith, right? Basics of it, and I know what Islam stands for, right? And I know the overall, I mean, you can say I've read Ibn Taymiyyah, I've read Ghazali, so all of these people, right? And then afterwards, I can answer the questions that the philosophers pose, right? And then I study the Western philosophy. That is going to be beneficial, of course, and we need some people who do that. And you can see in the West also some people who do that, and they are, I don't know the names of the institutions, but they are very popular. The people who study different religions and different philosophies as well, and then the debate other people as well. All this. But I don't know the names of the people. Maybe one person was what was his name? Hamza?
Hamza Yusuf.
No, yeah, Hamza Yusuf as well, of course. Hamza Zortzis as well, right? And yeah, these kind of people who have their background in Islam, are well grounded in Islam, then they go and study philosophy, then it is better. Otherwise it's mind-bending, it develops a skepticism, and if you are going to study on your own, there's a lot of gibberish out there, lots of things which are just, they're waste of time. I would say they're a waste of time. So you have to know what you have to study, you need to go with a goal what you're studying, and then you should be grounded in Islamic principles. Once you have that, then, which are very few people who do that, then you can go and study philosophy, right? So any person, I would discourage him to study philosophy. I would say, please don't stay there. Yeah.
Oh, one more question. We talked about in the previous lecture how science is not value neutral.
Yes.
And in this lecture we talked about how postmodernists consider science is theory laden.
Yeah.
So one thing is, a question is that in the Muslim society, from an Islamic perspective, has the Muslims achieved as much scientific progress as the West?
Wow. Where do you live? Where do you live?
Causeway.
With whom? With whom? Who's that guy?
You think that person instilled that question in him?
No, I don't think so. Maybe, who knows, right? So that's a good question, yeah. So the answer is no. The technological progress that took place in the West was, I think it was unprecedented. Why did it happen? That is a good question. Why did it happen? Because in the West, you had a collision between, not a collision, a collusion between, you can say a partnership between the capitalist, the scientist engineer and the nation state. Okay. So previously, what used to happen throughout history was that science used to happen in every civilization, but very few people would do it, right? Those people who were on the budget, on the payroll of the hakim, or the you can say the sultan or the king, right? So they would do it. Okay, there was not you can say established institutions to do science. So they would do science and they would make some progress, right? So let's say in the Islamic world, the Abbasid caliphates, they directly supported the translation movement. They gave the gold to the scholars, right? And any scholar who's going to translate a book, right? So they would get gold based upon the weight of the book. So they directly supported the scholars, and therefore the scholars, they produced a lot of works, and they did a lot of science as well. Okay? But then they were completely dependent upon the support from the caliphate. Okay. So now the support sometimes can be taken away because of wars, or because of maybe the caliphate grew weaker, or maybe he has to do something else, right? So it was, you can say it was fluctuating. The progress was fluctuating. But what happened in the West was, due to the colonization of India, there was a flood of raw materials in England. Okay. Now, at that time, just at that time in 1760, the steam engine was invented. Right? Now, after that steam engine was invented, now you can build machines that are going to make use of the raw materials that were coming from India. Okay. So there was a lot of textile innovation in Britain. Okay, so there were lots of different textile techniques that were developed in Britain based on the raw materials that were coming from India. Right? So you can imagine, Bengal was taken by the British, and Bengal was the richest region in the whole world. 13% of world GDP was in Bengal. So richer than modern day France, modern day UK, all of them combined, richer than that. Okay? So Bengal was so rich, and it produced a lot of raw materials. So the British, they took the raw materials and they produced it and they sold it back to the Indians. So they took the raw materials from India, they produced they produced the cloth and stuff, they sold it back to Indians. So that is what we did. Now afterwards, capitalism, Adam Smith came with his book Wealth of Nations, and slowly capitalism was introduced. And after capitalism came, then what happened was that the capitalist, because the entrepreneur, right, is the entrepreneur, is the driver of capitalism, and so what entrepreneur is not going to tax people. Okay? So where is the entrepreneur going to get his money from? He's going to get money from selling goods to the people. Okay? So previously, government can get their money from taxing people, right, and then they can support these activities, scientific activities. That is what used to happen. But now the entrepreneur can directly go to the people. Right? Now it is in his entrepreneurs, you can say, entrepreneur now has to give an incentive to the scientists and the engineers in order to produce goods for the masses. Okay? Now the entrepreneur and the scientists and the engineers, they came into a sort of partnership. The entrepreneur was like, okay, you produce products which can be distributed to the people, right? And the produce technology which can produce mass products, and I'm going to sell those mass products, produce a lot of profit, and give some profit to you. Okay? So in that sense, and also the idea of nation state, because when the nation states they came into being after the Treaty of Westphalia, roughly. So now the nation states they were in war with each other, they were fighting with each other in Europe, right? Now in order to fight with each other, they had to support the scientists, right? In order to produce high-tech, you can say, weaponry. So the nation state was producing the scientist and the engineer to produce high-tech weaponry, right, and so that it can wage war with other European nations. And the entrepreneur was also pumping a lot of money in science and technology in order to produce the items that can be mass-produced and sold to people, and therefore the money can be taken from all people, and then the entrepreneur is going to take some and going to give some to the engineer and the scientist. Okay? So in this sense, there were many, because a lot of money was pumped into science and technology, therefore there were many innovations, and there were many reasons for innovation, right? So let's say if I want to produce a toothpaste, I would produce a new kind of toothpaste, an innovation in technology, and sold it, mass produce it, sell it to people, I'll get a lot of money. Okay? So I'm going to start now producing soap. I'm going to now start producing more and more things which are going to provide more utility to the people. Okay? Now from that, I can get money from the people, and I can be very rich, give some to the scientists and the engineers, they can get rich as well. Okay? So now science and engineering became a profession. Previously it was done by some people, right, who were interested, and they were supported by the government, but now it became a full-fledged profession. So now many people can enter it, and that lead to a sort of, you can say, progress, scientific progress, not the moral progress, but the scientific progress that was unheard of previously. So the last 200 years, there's been a lot of scientific progress across that. Very good question. Yeah.
Just complement your points on top of
Yeah.
that. Right? You talk about nation states, you talk about entrepreneurs, capitalism. But also, maybe complement a little bit the modern banking system, how it originated in the West, right? It was to wage war.
Yeah.
The Bank of England, right? The
Yeah.
concept of government issued debt.
Yeah.
The king did not have the money to build a navy to wage war. The modern banking system was built for warfare.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's a crude interpretation.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
It's based on history.
That's true. That's true.
But, I'll go back to the previous question, which is, should we learn philosophy? I mean, it's absolutely, excuse my manner, but like, how would you be sitting here and sharing all this knowledge if you didn't study philosophy?
Yeah, because I studied Islam prior to studying philosophy.
So then the answer should not be don't study philosophy. It should be first get the right mindset, then go to study philosophy.
I think that is what I said.
Oh, I see. Yes.
But identify philosophy first.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you identify your philosophy? the word philosophy?
That's a good question as well. So philosophy, I would say Western philosophy, analytical philosophy. So the sort of philosophy that was developed in the West after the Enlightenment, both from Aristotle till here, right? So
But the old terminology of philosophy, let's say forget about religion for a moment. Philosophy is the, hold on for a moment. I'll wake you up when philosophy is a mind of oneself talk to himself. Okay, basically, let's say, regardless of any thoughts. For example, you're sitting in a room. How do I solve my X issue? Okay, and that's philosophy by itself because you're gonna come up with a conclusion. I go to the bank or I go to McDonald's, right? But I don't have money for the McDonald's. But what I'm doing with the money in the bank? But it's a philosophy by itself. So to study philosophy, like he said, very important statement. He said you get the base of Islam because your philosophy, of course, here we're talking about changing your brain or changing your who you are because what you think is what who you are. So let's say if you're based as a baby Islam from your parents and left 20 years old, who's he living with? So if you get that shake, of course, anybody can move it in right and left. So if you have that base of Islam, it's really tough. No matter how much I study philosophies, I know from the beginning, shake that strong tree first, and then you get me. But you're not going to be able to do that because that's what I mean.
Yeah,
That's very important to know what.
So by philosophy, I mean the discipline of philosophy that is taught in the universities, right? Prominently the modern Western universities. That is what it is. So the philosophy that you said is basically logic, right? So we apply logic all the time. So that, of course, that is why we are given the aql, right? That is why we are given the intellect. But by philosophy, I think the question was, he asked me whether we should study philosophy, right? So I assumed that he meant study philosophy in a university setting or in a formal setting. So that one, I said that you have to be cautious about it, and you have to develop your base in Islam first, and then you can study philosophy. I mean, if you want to, it's not a problem. But if you are going to go to philosophy without knowing anything about Islam, I've seen many cases. I mean, almost all of them, they are apostate. Almost all of them.
I think if the question now is addressed to all human beings, not only Muslims.
Yeah.
I think, for example, someone with a wrong conviction, let's say, for example, I mean, a modern day, I wouldn't say wrong. We have to be very careful with the terms here, you know. So, for example, someone who is born in a Christian society today, who is getting knowledge that is not Christian at origin at all. So he's getting wrong knowledge in that sense. Then that person, philosophy can help him. Actually, at least go back a little bit to rationality, and then from there,
Yeah, maybe it's possible. Maybe it's possible. Yeah, I've seen one or two cases amongst thousands and thousands who have done that. But usually, what I've seen, right? What I have read Western philosophy, and it is just my opinion. You can discard it; it's not a problem. So what I see is that it's just based upon too much skepticism, right? So what I say that the West is skeptical about everything except its own skepticism. Understood what I mean?
So what Descartes said, right?
So that is a problem. Right? You are going to be very difficult. It's going to be difficult for you to accept any religion. Yeah.
I think for me personally, I just feel like distill the argument very simple. I tend to agree with you because I think for most human beings, it's very difficult to understand and keep two opposing ideas in their mind.
Cognitive
Not everyone is
dissonance.
capable. I would say most people are not capable of that. It can drive people mad. And I have seen that. It's more often the case than not.
Okay.
It's just my feeling.
Okay, so let's move on to another question, and then I have some activity which we'll do in 5 minutes. So no?
Sure, if people have the stamina.
Okay. Then we can stop it. I mean, if it's up to you.
Yeah, next time.
Next time.
Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair.
Can this activity be conducted in the next session, or is it specifically
I have
related
just some Quranic ayah, and I just want for a person to be a modern or a postmodern, and then tell me what is his interpretation. I mean, what will he see in that Quranic ayah? That was just
I want to do it.
Let's do it, yeah.
I would like to do it. It's 9:15. It's
Yeah,
okay,
so-
right? Sun cost.
5 minutes, 5 minutes.
Sun cost. The time that's gone is gone.
Okay,
Sun
let's do
cost.
it quickly in 5 minutes. Okay, who wants to be a modern? Who wants to be a modernist? Anyone? You are now a modernist. Okay. So sorry about.
Is this the model? You're the model? Okay. Would you like to come at the front?
No.
Okay, so how would you interpret this hadith?
Actually, I cannot read it.
The best people are those of my generation, and then those who will come after them.
Arabic.
خير الناس
خير
قرني.
الناس قرني. Yeah.
يلون
خير
أبواب.
الناس قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم ثم يجب من بعضهم قوم تسبق صحبتهم أيمانهم وأيمانهم
Oh, yeah. That's a very philosophical.
Just to simplify it, right? Remembering the lessons from the previous sessions, like constant progress,
Yeah.
logical progression, etc., etc.
Moral progression.
Moral progression, etc.
So this is talking about Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is talking about moral progression, right? So the best people morally are my generation. Then there's going to be a moral degradation as the generations are going to pass by. Whereas a modern is completely opposite. Right? We are becoming better morally than what we were previously. Understood, right? And anyone wants to be a postmodern? It's easy. It's going to be easy. Postmodern? Okay, postmodern. Okay. I think we have already done this. So certainly Allah, only way is Islam. Only way acceptable, only truth is Islam. So what would you say about
So postmodern?
it? Yeah.
If I say I will not accept it, right?
It's going to be difficult for you to accept it, right? Because if you are brought up in an environment which is more relativist, right? So you will be like, there are many ways to God. Why is the Quran saying that there is only one way, that is Islam? Okay, modern. Any modern guy?
Finally, modern.
Any modern person? Any volunteers?
Everyone is appointed there.
Any person?
Modern.
Any volunteer? Modern?
Imam Shaz.
Okay. What will you see in this ayah? Okay, so the ayah says it is not for a believing man or woman when Allah and His Messenger decree a matter to have any choice in that matter. Indeed, whoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger has clearly gone astray. Whereas modernism, we can reason, and we can come to objective truths through reason, right? Whereas the Quran is saying that when Allah and His Messenger say something, you do not apply your reason, right? If you are a Muslim, then you cannot be like, why do I have to pray 5 times? Why not 3 times? Right? I have to reason, right? My reason is that 3 times is better than 5 times. You cannot do that, right? You have to obey. Okay, so that is what Allah is saying. And the modernist philosophy, which is like reason above everything else, and we can reach objective truths through reason, is contradicting what Allah is saying here, right? So, yeah. So,
Postmodernists would be feelings.
yeah. Postmodern, final. Let's do final. This one, postmodern. I think you will be much better placed because you know Arabic. So maybe you can try postmodern.
Okay, so what's the question?
How would you see this ayah if you are completely sold into postmodernism?
Also will not accept it.
Yeah, but why would you not accept it?
Because belief or disbelief is a perception or is relative.
What else? What else?
The white and
Yes.
the color.
Yes. Yeah. So the Quran is using this terminology, right? So
okay.
when in the day of judgment you will have people who will have bright faces and you'll have people who have dark faces,
And
gloomy faces.
colors used
Yes.
here, for white is for bright. And
Yes, dark is, yeah, and black is for dark.
I mean,
That's the norm, right? That's the Semitic norm. So hair white does not mean clearly white skin.
Figure
It
of
means
speech.
someone who's like who's bright, right? Who's very happy and bright, right? Whereas dark does not mean dark skin. It means someone who's gloomy, right? So now a postmodernist would, I've seen people interpret it like this is white supremacy. This is supporting white supremacy against the blacks, right? So yeah, very problematic, these kind of ideologies. Okay. Yeah, Jazakallah.